Welcome to the Gita in Action podcast. My name is Radha, and I am here with a group of seekers. We are reading through the Bhagavad Gita, one verse at a time, breaking it down, talking about it, both from, what the Gita is communicating and how it's relevant in our lives. And it's been really great. I've really started, from the beginning, really looked forward to these sessions every week. And I find that they keep me on track through the week. It's just that constant hearing, that constant remembering of some of these eternal truths that really keep us grounded as we move through this material maze and bring us back constantly to what's important. So I appreciate you all being here this morning and sharing your hearts and reflections and how you relate to this text. And it's so much stronger when we do it together. So thank you for being here. And if you want to join us, you can text me. If you know my number, you can text me and I'll send you a link, or you can get on our Instagram at Seekers Quest 108. Go to the bio in the link tree. There's a bunch of links. One of them is to join the WhatsApp thread where you get all the notifications. So, and this Friday is actually my due date for my baby. So if you're on the thread, I'll keep you guys updated as to our class schedule. We might have a little bit of changes, and I think Chaitanya Charan is going to come on soon too to give us the chapter 2 summary. So stay tuned on that for our changes. And also, if you're on our family thread, we have a family thread where everybody can share. I'll share pictures and stuff when the baby comes. So our family thread, if you're on the normal thread, our family thread, the link for that to join that is pinned at the top of the message on the normal Seekers Quest thread. And you can just click on that and join our family so that these are just we have ongoing conversations through the week, or people posting. It's an opportunity for everybody to post, and it's maybe a little bit more intimate. So please join that if you haven't, and we'll stay connected that way. Okay, so how are you guys this morning? So happy a couple more people snuck on. Good to see you, Damodar, Priya, Erica. So happy you guys are here. All right, today we might finish the second chapter, which is exciting. We are going to start at text 69. So chapter 2, text 69. Oh, Erica, do you have something to share? I just saw your hand go up. Oh, are you just clapping? Okay, great. Great. I thought, wow, that's fun. Somebody wants to share right at the beginning. Doesn't usually happen, but that's great. Okay, so text 69, chapter 2. That's where we're starting. And we have four texts left in this chapter. So let's see if we can get through today. So text 69 says, "What is night for all beings is a time of awakening for the self-controlled. And the time of awakening for all beings is night for the introspective sage." This is a really beautiful kind of poetic verse. It's not literal. It's not literal, saying that night is the time for the sages and day is night is the time for the self-controlled, and the time of awakening of the beings is night. Wow, I really butchered that. Okay, it's not saying one is day and one is night, literally. It's saying that night is the domain of inactivity, and day is the domain of activity. We know that. That's how we function. That's how typically the majority of people kind of navigate through the world, is that they're active during the day, and then night they're not so active. They're resting. And so these are polarities. These are opposites. And so it's saying that for the spiritualist, similarly, for the spiritualist, spiritual subjects are the domain of activity. And sensual subjects, things that appease our senses, sense gratification, things things that we taste with our tongue, things that we touch, things that we've talked about a million times, that we see on social media, that just pull our attention away from what we know really makes us feel connected and grounded. Those kinds of things are the domain of inactivity. So the spiritualist pursues spiritual subjects and kind of doesn't pursue so much things that please the senses. And it's saying for the materialist, the reverse is true. So for materialist, spiritual subjects are the domain of inactivity, and material subjects are the domain, or pursuing things for material enjoyment are the domain of activity. So it's just flipped like that, like night and day are opposite. In the same way, a materialist, like their priorities, the way that they're engaging their consciousness, the things that they're doing throughout the day are opposite as a spiritualist. Because we're still in this section where Krishna is answering the question of how a perfected yogi moves through the world. And right now he's still answering, until the end of the chapter, he's answering specifically how a perfected yogi engages their senses. So here, Krishna is just pointing out the polarity or the opposite nature of a materialist, which is what we more, kind of see in our everyday life, and what we're kind of trying to pull out of more so. We're kind of trying to step out of the material world and more into the spiritual world. That's what we're doing here, right? So the materialist who really pursues things to please the ego and things to please their senses, their priorities and the way they invest their time and their energy and their values are opposite. And that's what this voice or this verse is pointing out. So it's just contrasting these two people. And it's saying that one is intelligent in material activities for sense gratification. They know how to make money. They know how to spend their money. They know how to get the most out of, things that they enjoy around them. They know how to indulge and optimize those things. And this is what they care about most. This is like their top priority. This is like the purpose of life, right? It's like, okay, I'm going to make some money so that I can go on these elaborate vacations. And then on the weekends, I'm going to drink so that I can forget how hard it was to make the money. And then, we've all seen this kind of like just pattern in everyday life of the typical materialist who lives for these things. And they just are on this cycle. This is just get back up on Monday, repeat. And, aspire for the big house, the nice car, the bigger, the better, the more luxurious, the better, the more joy to the senses. I'm into it. That's a materialist mentality. And the Gita compares this. You'll see this analogy a lot in Sastra or spiritual text. They compare this state to being asleep, to a dreamlike state. In the same way that when we fall asleep and we have dreams, they don't really quite make sense with what we actually understand to be our conception of reality, right? Like the details of our dreams are kind of like fuzzy, and they don't like, you'll wake up and you're like, I just had a dream about a bird and a mountain, and the bird was climbing up the mountain, and it just like doesn't really make sense, but there's maybe like a couple things that stand out. And, it's just, that's like the dreamlike state, like this subconscious state. And spiritual text compares the state we're in right now to a dreamlike state from the perspective that the soul is the self, and the soul's reality is one of eternality, bliss, knowledge. That's the soul's reality, the soul's essence. And the soul just wants to connect back with God because the soul is a part of God. The soul is a divine spark of God. So the soul moves around in this material existence and gets so distracted by these material allurements or this promise of happiness around us from sense gratification that it gets confused, right? Because the soul's nature is to desire and to love. So the soul gets confused, and the soul pursues these material pleasures, these temporary material pleasures for happiness, even though the soul's, what will bring the soul real happiness is connection with God. So in that way, if we can kind of step back from our current conception of reality and understand that actual reality is that this is the soul, that we are the soul, that the self is the soul, and the material covering is just that, just a material covering. if we can really connect to that and see that, then when we're moving around the material world and we're pursuing sense gratification to make us happy, we're filling up that shopping cart, we're looking for that next big house or big boat or big job to make us feel powerful and good about ourselves. We know that's actually not real. That's not actually what's going to satisfy our soul. And in that way, it doesn't quite make sense with what is actually real. So it's just like it's just like zooming out more and more to what is actually real. We know when we're sleeping that the dreams we have are not real. But can we really get to the point where we realize that even what we're experiencing, a lot of times our thoughts, our desires, our beliefs are not real. And through our experience, that's really the reason that we're here in this material maze. And we come across all these obstacles and challenges. We come to realize that maybe the things we thought made us happy don't. Maybe serving our ego isn't really that fulfilling. And maybe, in fact, serving the ego is not fulfilling at all. And it's actually quite painful, right? So we from our experience in this material maze, we kind of get there. But then we can engage in these sastras, we can enrich ourselves with the spiritual wisdom, and we can really understand what's happening here. And that is that it's not even our nature. It's not even conducive to what is real inside of us. And we're confused in that pursuit. So that's the dreamlike state that you'll constantly hear. Or you'll hear songs about it. We wake up, sleeping souls, because the soul's asleep. The soul's like engaging in kind of a false reality, and it's confused in that way. So these are the two people. The one is the materialist. The other is the introspective sage, and they're awake to cultivation of self-realization. They feel transcendental pleasure in the gradual advancement of spiritual culture. And we all experience that to a degree too. And the cool part is the more that you engage, the more that you chant God's names, the more that you listen to kirtan, the more that you have spiritual association, the more that you'll want those things. Just in the same way that this happens in material life, the more that you engage in a certain material activity, the more that you want it. But the difference is that in material life, and the Gita will tell us this too later on, in material life, when we pursue material things, it tastes like nectar at the beginning, and we'll see that it soon will turn to poison if we pursue it too much. If we lean into it too much, it will soon turn to poison. And spiritual things are different. They might taste a little bitter at the beginning. It might be kind of difficult to get yourself to sit in a room and just meditate for 10 minutes. That might be difficult. But the more that you do it, it will become sweet like nectar. And you'll see that you have no problem sitting in a room by yourself for a half hour or an hour meditating. It'll be, and that will be like purification, like a bath for the consciousness. You'll find that this is how it works. This is what happens. It's probably happened to a lot of us. If it hasn't happened to you, get ready, it's coming. And then what happens with that is that we kind of lose the taste for material pleasures because we see how small that pleasure is comparatively, how much that actually doesn't really bring me pleasure. And our perspective kind of switches. So this is the process. And this is exactly what happens to us. A spiritually interested person pursues and perceives things differently. And we probably all notice that, like in our day-to-day, a show that you like and you watch and it's entertaining, but then after a while you're like, these people are just going through the same scenarios over and over, and they don't really understand that what they're doing is just the same behavior that's leading them to the same result. And it's just continuing, but with different circumstances, right? And we find that entertaining. We look at that, we feel connected to it, we find it entertaining. And we get to a point where we realize like, oh, that's actually us. I'm doing the same thing. I'm trying all these different ways to make the most money so that I can build the biggest empire or, have the nicest vacations. And then I go on these vacations and, sometimes they're nice, sometimes they're not. But at the end of the day, I'm not really feeling any more satisfied than I did before. And I'm just back in this material maze of doing the same thing, right? We start to see that. And that's just shows up. We become more acute to it. We become more attuned to it. The other day, my husband and I went to the shopping mall, and my husband loves shopping, by the way. I hate shopping, not because I'm so evolved, but because I'm impatient. And if I'm doing something, it's like I'm in task mode, and shopping is just like too overwhelming. So I'm just not so into it. But we were driving home, and he's like, isn't it so crazy? Just like all the people out, like buying all these things. He's like, you can't take it with you. And I was like, yeah, it really is crazy. Like how much time we spend investing in these things that have no return for us. And we think that they do, we think that this is going to be it. This is the next big thing until we find another big thing, and then it's like, oh, well, I forgot that thing. Now it's sitting in my garage for the next 10 or 15, or, I have stuff in my garage has been in there since we moved in. I haven't even looked at, that at the time I thought was like, I absolutely needed and I'd do anything for. And then it's like, how much of our lives do we give up for these things? How hard do we work so that we can have these kinds of things? Damodar Priya says, I'm the same way. Now that I can buy online and can skip dealing with crowds, I'm all for it. I totally agree. I don't even shop around anymore. I just go to Amazon. I type it in. That's it. My husband is like all into like these different coupons and places, and he'll spend a whole Saturday going to different places to get the best deal. Anyway, not because I'm so spiritual, because I'm impatient. But the main point is that when we see, we have to understand that these things we can't take with us, and really the value that we even think in the moment is going to change tomorrow, and therefore how valuable was it really? So spiritualists have to develop. Does anybody else want to share? Does anybody else want to share about anything related to that, or not anything not related to that?
I do.
Oh, great.
Sorry, I don't know how to raise my hand online.
No problem. Please share. Maria.
I just wanted to say that since I've been chanting kirtan and everything for like past 5-6 years, maybe 7, my favorite time of the day is like around 3:30 in the morning. I wake up and all I feel is transcendental bliss, and there's nothing to interrupt it. And it's just what gets me through. It's everything.
That's so beautiful. Thanks for sharing. The scriptures say that time of the day, that time before the sun comes up, is like the most spiritually potent time of the day. So if we can get ourselves up early and connect with God during that time, yeah, it's also for a lot of us the time that like our families are still asleep and the house is so quiet and you can really focus. But the spiritual energy is really potent at that time. That is the time to engage in spiritual practices if you can. Mm-hmm. And I used to be like that my entire life until I got pregnant, and now I'm like flipped and I can't get out of it, and it's brutal. But anyway, if you can, even just try, a couple times a week to experience that. I totally agree. It's magic. It's a magic time. Thank you. Thanks for sharing. So as the spiritualists has to develop an impurity sensor against the outside stimulus that degrades us. We have to develop this sensor so that we can discern between what stimuli is going to come in and be degrading versus what's going to be uplifting. Our inner world is where purity can manifest and empower us towards our full potential. You hear this all the time, like most people don't ever reach their full potential in life. You've heard that this is like, in the world of self-development and self-improvement, most people never reach their full potential. And from the spiritual perspective, the soul is covered with impurities, and we have to uncover it to see its purity and virtue. And a lot of what the soul is covered with is this misconception that we talked about earlier, that material things will satisfy me. but we're also so rooted in the ego. Even this idea that material things will satisfy me is directly connected to the ego, right? How can I put myself in the center? How can I be happier? How can I be more beautiful? How can I be more powerful? Right? This is what we're centered on. This is where our mind is every day. It's all about me. And what we realize through these spiritual texts is that mindset in itself is actually degrading. It actually doesn't bring us happiness, and it actually causes a lot of problems for us in our relationships, in our roles, in our functional roles. And we come to learn that the more, selfless that we can be, the more connected and happy we are. And this is what spiritual texts teach us. And this is what inhibits us from reaching our true potential. I'm so damn concerned about me in the way I look and what, the things I need to do to be loved or to feel worth or to be enough or to fit in. I'm so worried about all of these material designations, these things that I need to satisfy the ego, that I think I need to satisfy the ego, that I lose touch with my true nature. And in that, I disconnect from myself and my source. And how can we be happy if we're disconnected? But this is the dichotomy. This is what's happening in this material existence. So we're doing time and time every day. This is our routine, right? So the soul's covered with these impurities, and we have to uncover it to see its purity and its virtue. And at the beginning of chapter 2, I think maybe text 20, we talked about all these virtues of the soul, what the soul actually is at its core, at its essence. It's full of knowledge, it's full of bliss, it's eternal. All these other qualities are mentioned at the beginning: unchangeable, immeasurable, individual, inconceivable, immovable, indestructible. Right? This is what the soul is. And the ego is things that are, we're selfish, we're self-serving, where we get stuck in being right or being wrong. We get fearful, we get anxious, we get scared. Right? This is the ego. This is a sign, this is like the check engine light that something's off in yourself, because now you're acting from the ego. And the ego is not your true self. The ego is just this mask that we put on as we navigate through this alternate reality of material existence to protect ourselves, without realizing that our true protection and shelter exists in our connection with God. So the soul is covered with these impurities and that keep it from manifesting its virtue. And worse than this is that the impurities bring out the worst in us. And we know when that's happening, right? And we'll all probably experience it in the coming months as we sit down with our family at that Thanksgiving meal, and we revert right back to the person we were when we were 10 years old, which is, maybe we're competitive with maybe, whatever. We all can probably think of some of the qualities that we imbibe that don't really jive with our higher nature and frankly don't make us feel good at all. So this is what these impurities do to us. They make us think that we're this body. They trick us into thinking that we're actually this body, and what will make us happy is serving this body. The end. And in that, we get fearful. We get anxious. We want to hold on to what we have. We want this self-centered reality, which is not our true nature, right? Our true nature is that we serve the whole. We're servants of the whole. And we're not the center of reality, right? So Rani said, should I be happy we don't celebrate Thanksgiving in Europe? Yeah, there you go. It could be bittersweet for a lot of us, for sure. So, but it can also, if we can learn to look at it as maybe kind of like a challenge for ourselves, and this is not everybody struggles in this way, but I know a lot of people do. And if we can kind of look at it, okay, can I show up and be like, like a 2.0 version of myself, maybe not the most perfect version of myself, but can I sit and tolerate? Can I increase my level of tolerance a little bit? Can I go out of my way to be a little bit more giving and loving, even if I'm not feeling that in return? Can I imbibe some of these qualities, these godlike qualities independent of my surroundings and what's happening to me at the time? Can I stay grounded in my space and my truth and in who I want to be? Damodar Priya on the board says, it comes into focus when disaster strikes. We've been planning for hurricanes or other crises. Like, what is important? What do we take with us? And we realize that all we want is each other. My husband and I, our pups and our deities. Damodar Priya lives in Florida, so she just went through this hurricane. I mean, also important documents, but yeah, when you realize what do you leave behind, and at the time of death, I can't even take my husband, pups, and deities with me. Yeah, and that's another, obstacle that we talked about the three material miseries. One is caused by natural disasters, but if we can learn to see these like tests for us, like opportunities to upgrade spiritually, and it looks like Damodar Priya is talking just like that, it's this change in perspective that happens when you're right at the precipice of these big moments in life, these big turning points, or these big changes, or that can alter our reality. Can we use it to further our connection to God, to increase our perspective, to broaden our perspective, to understand what's really important? Yeah, that's beautiful. So with these impurities, because we're so corrupted with them, we can't even discern what is pure and impure anymore. It's like we talked about this before. And if you're like in the dating world and you're like, you have a lot of bruises, you have a lot of scars, you're going to be attracted to somebody that has that same degree of hurt that you do. This is just what happens naturally. Like, it's easy for us to say like, oh, I'm not attracted to a criminal. Like, we all know that, like somebody who's, makes their money by stealing. That's not attractive to most of us. But we don't realize, to the degree that we're hurt is to the degree that our sensor's off, and we'll attract somebody with that same level of hurt. And in that, we'll encounter problems in the relationship that are functions of both of our hurts, and we'll either get through that together and get closer and grow together, or it'll push us so apart to the point where each person has to at some point look themselves in the mirror and say, okay, I need to fix this, or I'm going to end up in the same relationship over and over again. And this has happened to a lot of us as well, right? So it's the same way. To the degree that we're impure, to the degree that we're stuck in our ego, our sensor is only calibrated to that frequency. So we're going to attract things in our lives that match that frequency. So this is, again, and then we blame the other thing, right? Because we're maybe in a relationship and we're both trying to be God. We had relationships like that where we both are trying to be God, or completely unbalanced. One person's God and then the other person's making that person God. And these are just completely dysfunctional dynamics, because the reality is that God's the center and we serve the center. And in that, we can cooperate peacefully together in a way that brings us closer to ourselves, closer to each other, and closer ultimately to God. So this is why kind of purifying this sensor is so important, and the work that we're doing here in this world. And you'll see in your unique circumstances that you're going throughout the day, in your relationships and all these things, you'll see different challenges to try to teach you these lessons. And you'll see that if you don't learn the lesson the first time, you better believe it's coming up again for you. It's coming up again for you to learn how to be more selfless, more loving, more giving, more to let go of some of your attachments. Right? And this is, when we get into a marriage, this is what a marriage is. It's a container for us to come together. And when you're used to doing something that you want, you get a little bit of pushback. And in that, you really have to kind of evaluate, like, okay, how important is this to me? How much can I give for this other person? And in that, hopefully you're doing that together. And there's this push and pull, this healthy push and pull where you can get to a point where you're shedding some of your attachments, some of your material attachments, some of your material identities. And you're learning how to be more selfless and more giving. And if it's a healthy relationship, you're doing this together, and you're coming together, and there's an equal kind of balance on both sides. And that's why we have these things in our lives, because it's teaching us that. It's preparing us for the spiritual world, because this material world is not real and it's not satisfying. to the extent that the spiritual world is. Right? The spiritual world, it's, again, if we look at how we are in dreams, this world is more real than a dream, but the spiritual world is more real than this world. Right? So we have to kind of see that relative perspective and see that that's waiting for us. So in this world, the materialist will go around and process all outside stimuli based on if it's enjoyable, right? If the answer is yes, it wants more. If no, take it away, regardless of how pure it is. This is if we don't have the spiritual knowledge, if we don't have our spiritual practices, if we're not connecting, this will be your default mode. And it's not your fault, but this is your default mode. Is because we're in this material world and we're allured by everything we see around us, and the soul becomes covered. This is how you will move around in this world. Is this enjoyable? Yes. Okay, I'll take more. Is it not? Nope. and then over life we learn, like, okay, maybe that wasn't so enjoyable, and we start. But it's really that simple. We're drawn to that. It's because we're creatures of desire. We desire. We have a consciousness. We want to love, and it gets displaced. So this verse of the Gita is highlighting the difference in values between the materialist and the spiritualist. And if society imposes censors, the materialists who lack an impurity censor oppose it fiercely, right? And we've seen this also in ourselves, or even when we're children, when our parents enforce rules that to maybe protect us or to bring us to a better place, we're not used to it or we don't understand it. We're going to rebel against those rules, right? I think my whole teenage years, sorry, Mom, because I was like, nope, not coming home at that time. Thanks, Mom. But we have to get better at that ourselves. We have to understand the censors and the purpose of these censors. And we also have to be careful not to judge or condemn people as degraded that maybe haven't developed these censors so well. And because this can be alienating, and that's the opposite of what we're trying to do. We're not trying to be sectarian here. We're trying to connect. We're trying to be Unitarian. And so in that, we have to understand that not everybody has access to this knowledge, and people are at different places in their lives. And sometimes if somebody's dealing with something so big, like maybe, a loved one's sick, or maybe they're, a single mom taking care of a bunch of kids, and they just don't have the time or the resources or the energy to really invest in these kinds of things. And they're a little bit broken, and they're kind of navigating around like that. And their sensor is a little bit off. We have to try to have compassion for these kinds of people, a lot of times this kind of person will be us too, more than we realize or even want to admit. Right. So we need to have compassion for ourselves. We need to have compassion for others, and understand that our job, our service in this life is to bring others to this place. And not by standing on our high horse and preaching, but by being this example, right? By being a demonstration of God's love in our lives for those around us. And in that way, people experience God's love. People experience the essence of the soul through you. You become an instrument. That's what an instrument is. And if we can if we can purify ourselves to the extent that we can become an instrument for other people, and we can create that change, what kind of different world would we live in, right? If we're not all just out trying to satisfy our own egos in this super unnatural position that doesn't even belong to us. So that's what we're doing here. Does anybody want to share before we go on to the next verse? Okay, we'll go on to 270. A person who is not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires that enter like rivers into the ocean, which is ever being filled but is always still, can alone achieve peace, and not the man who strives to satisfy such desires. So Krishna is still answering this part of the question about how a perfected yogi moves about in this world. He's still answering how a perfected yogi engages their senses. And in this particular verse, engaging the senses, it's not just physical, but also mental. Right? When we're purposely engaged, our consciousness is full of some big purpose, right? And if some distraction comes in, it's relatively small. We're so full in our engagement that if a little distraction comes in, we don't really notice it, right? But if our consciousness is like a tiny puddle and we're not doing anything meaningful with our lives, when a distraction comes in, it's like a river, and it can really disturb our consciousness, and it can really pull our consciousness away. So this is why it's so important to have purposeful, meaningful engagement in this world, taking responsibility for something bigger than ourselves to create something of value. And this is what like having children is for a lot of us, right? Marriage is, you're entrusted to care for another one of God's creatures, right? Another one of God's children. And the more that we can see that this child or our spouse is not ours, we don't own them, we don't possess them, they're not just an extension of our ego, right? The more that we can learn that, the more that we can really show up in a godlike manner, in a way that's selfless, in a way that we're really providing them unconditional love, in a way that's purifying both of us. And that's, again, somebody asked me yesterday, how do you, like they had a material problem. They're like, I have a material problem and I kind of want to solve it with another material problem. And as spiritualists, we don't have to say, oh, all material desires are bad, but we have to try to center our lives around God in a way that our material desires are purifying us. So if you want to get married, you want to have a kid, you want to use this as an opportunity to purify yourself. In your marriage, in your relationship, in your role as a parent or a daughter or a son or a brother, use that relationship as a way to purify yourself, to feel that resistance, to feel that push against your ego, to feel those attachments. Feel when you're making your kid an extension of your ego. When you feel when you're doing this, and be aware of it, and try to make decisions that are more in line with being selfless, with showing up with unconditional love, with giving rather than taking. If we can do this, we can prepare ourselves to show up for God. And this was one of the big qualifications for Arjuna to receive spiritual knowledge. If you remember in the first chapter, he was so compassionate. He had so much care and love for his relatives. That he was fertile soil for being able to imbibe some of these qualities, because we ultimately want to get to the place where we see every living being as part and parcel of God. We're not judging them based off of how they can serve our ego, right? Like, I'll be friends with that person. They agree with me. They make me feel good about myself. I'll be friends with them. No, we love everybody because we see that they're part and parcel of God. And therefore that love emanates off of us and fills everybody up around us, right? That's where we want to get this level of collective consciousness together, where we're doing this. So these kinds of things that come into our life, these material desires that we have, our family lives, our work lives, our relationships with our colleagues, we can be these lights. We can use this unique blueprint that we have, these things that we have in our life, these material things that maybe give us some happiness or desires, or we can use them to purify ourselves if we can get into this right consciousness. And this is this meaningful engagement. How can I, whatever is in my life right now, you don't have to change it, but how can you do it more as a servant of God and less for your ego? We could all think about things right now in our lives. How can I show up more as a servant of God and less for my ego? And if we do this within the spiritual context, understanding that it's God who gave us this talent, this family, this circumstance, our consciousness can become full. So we don't even have to change anything in our lives. We just have to change our consciousness around it. People that don't have meaningful engagement in their lives, they'll get swept away by temptations. Even there's even been studies, another Netflix show that I got into is this show about the blue zone. It's like the blue zone, they call the blue zone certain areas in America, or not even in America, in the world where people live past 100. And they do all these studies to see why are these people living to be over 100? And a common characteristic that they found in all these societies, all these cultures around the world where they have a lot of people that live past 100, is that they have meaningful engagement. They have meaningful purpose, a lot of times in the form of their family, but even like taking care of a plant, something, just something that's meaningful. There's been studies in nursing homes where people that have a plant that they're taking care of live longer. So this is such an important concept. Obviously it makes our consciousness stronger, makes our bodies healthier, we live longer. So this is like a, scientific. When we strive to free ourselves from these impurities, we may still feel impure desires rising in our consciousness. So it's still going to happen, but we shouldn't get discouraged by this, right? We should know that we become impure, not as much by what we feel, but by what we do, our actions in this world. And that's not to say that our emotions and our intentions aren't important, because they are, but we can only work on so much at one time, right? So we can recognize we have impure desires. We can recognize we're being pulled in this direction. Let's really try to focus on our engagement in this world, where we're going, what we're doing, how we're spending our time, the decisions that we're making, the person that we're showing up as. And as we make incremental progress in that, our thoughts, our feelings, our beliefs, they'll come along with that. And so the Gita compares the rising of the sensual desires in our consciousness to the occurrence of disturbances in an ocean when a river flows into it. So if our consciousness is like an ocean, of love and devotion to God, when these little rivers of desires flow in, it's not even going to affect us. Right? It's like an ocean that remains steady and not agitated. Like a person's consciousness, if a person's fixed on divinity, when these outside stimuli come in, we see them for what they are, which is maybe some level of temporary happiness, but ending not, right? Ending poison. They're really not going to make us that much happier. So we just kind of let them come in, and we don't pay attention to them so much. And we can't always control the size of the rivers, the things that come in. We can't always control the size of the outside stimuli that comes in, but we do our best. But we can control the size of our consciousness by changing what we primarily focus on and are attached to and are thinking about. This is how we arm ourselves with that coding, that inner coding that we talked about at our last class, by engaging in these kinds of sanghas, right? Having this uplifting association, putting our mind into sastra, learning these spiritual scriptures and these spiritual truths, and spending time with God, just in prayer, in meditation, chanting the names of God. All of these things, we're increasing our ocean. We're increasing the size of our ocean, so that when these rivers come in, we're less likely to notice the change. And in this way, we become less vulnerable to these rivers that dump into us, and less inclined to act on lower levels. Even if they arise within us, we're less inclined to act on those levels. So does anybody want to share anything about that before we move on to maybe the last verse we'll do here? 71. Okay, we'll do 71 because it's not very long. 71, a person who has given up all desires for sense gratification, who lives free from desires, who has given up all sense of proprietorship and is devoid of false ego, he alone can attain real peace. So this answers how a person, again, moves about in the world while engaging their senses. They give up the desire for sense gratification. And they understand that one's eternal actual position is an eternal servant of God, without claiming this material body to be oneself and without falsely claiming proprietorship over anything in this world. Right? And this is the reality. This, because again, like we talked about at the beginning, what we're experiencing day in and day out here, it is a dreamlike state. We have to understand relative to our actual identity as an eternal soul, what we're experiencing here is a dreamlike state. So if we can get to the place where we understand that our actual position is a servant of God, without trying to be God, which again is our default state. And if we can attune our sensors to this, we can see how much we're showing up in this world with the mentality that we are God, right? That we should be served, that things should manifest, our things in our life should manifest according to our desires. And if it doesn't, that's not okay. Right? We're trying to take a position that's not ours there, right? If we can understand that our actual position is a servant of God, and we know that God is the proprietor of everything, so therefore, everything must be used for the satisfaction of God. And this is where we try to align our lives more like that. We don't have to get rid of our desires. We don't have to get rid of the things in our life that do bring us some level of happiness, or, we just have to spiritualize them. We just have to use them as ways to purify our consciousness, to upgrade, to become more selfless, more loving, more compassionate, more understanding, less focused on me, right? That's what we need to do here. That's just shifting our consciousness around that. And that's how we can function in a way in this material existence, this dreamlike state, that we're getting closer to God and we're getting closer to that spiritual eternity. Understanding that every living entity is an eternal part and parcel of God in spiritual identity. And the position of the living entity is never on the level of God. We're all servants of God. We're all part and parcel. And in that way, we're all sparks of divinity. And that's where we ultimately want to get in our relationships. I don't want to see my husband as, what can he do for me to satisfy my ego, to make my life easier, to make my life better. I want to get into the consciousness where I can show up for my husband in that way, right? How can I serve my husband in a way that's bringing his consciousness closer to God? How can I serve my husband in a way that's bringing his consciousness closer to God? So how can I, one, be more of an example of God in our interactions? And how can I be an example of in my day-to-day life? That's how we do that. We use these relationships to purify us and to bring others up with us at the same time. And in this verse, when it talks about desirelessness, it's not referring to utter desirelessness, that's because that's not even possible. You can't, like, a person cannot just be desirelessness. We desire things. That's this existence. That's the way this vehicle is made. But it refers to lowered material desires. So we want to let go of these lower material desires and replace them with higher desires. Right? Like Arjuna didn't want to fight for his own sense gratification, but when he became fully God conscious, he wanted to fight because he knew God wanted him to fight. He knew that would be the best, that would be the most godly thing for him to do in that scenario, in that circumstance, in that time. And so he's doing the same action. The result is the same. He's fighting, but his consciousness around it, the reason that he's doing it, his intention is different. And this is where we want to get in our everyday lives. We could be doing this very same things. Our lives might look the very same way, but our consciousness around it is different. The reason that we're doing it is different. Our intention behind it is different. If you have an intention to make a lot of money, if you have that intention, great. Make a lot of money, use it for good, right? Use it in selfless service to God. Right? So we can do this, whatever your desire is, you can dovetail it into the service of God. If you want to be a mother, if you want to have kids, if you want to have a bunch of kids, great, do it. But understand that you're doing it in service to God. These aren't your kids. You don't own them. You don't possess them. And try to practice that healthy level of detachment and unconditional love to really be that first guru for them, that first guru, that first example of God's love. And in that way, bringing them closer to God. That's a beautiful service. But we can all do that. We can all think about the way that our lives are filled up right now and how we can, whatever we're doing, we can do in a way that puts God at the center and not our egos at the center, right? And it might just be a little change. It might not even look different from the outside, but our intention around it is different. Mariah, do you have an example for us or something to share?
Yeah.
Please share.
I have a few things here coming up. One of the things I'll start with is there was a quote I remember reading a lot. I forget exactly who said it. It's probably like kind of like from like a Buddhist or some sort of culture, but it's like, if you love something, give it away, right? And in the sense of give it away of like, let it be, let it, or like even like a flower, you know, instead of plucking that flower, water it, right? And it's a similar concept of like, it's not mine to keep and it's not mine to hold on to try to extract some sort of pleasure out of, but it's its own thing that I get to serve and give life to. And then and you know, even with raising my daughter, that's been like a huge lesson for me, especially with separating from her father and like only having her, you know, every other week, and just like, you know, a lot of times it's just like phone calls. I mean, she lives close, so I mean, I can still like go and see her, but you know, I honor that's his time with her and my time with her. But anyways, that was like a huge mantra I had to tell myself, was like, okay, I love her. I have to trust that like she has her own path. And that was another mantra, was like, she's Krishna's, you know, she is God's. She has her own journey. She has her own path. And that is so hard to do as a mother, because like you want to like keep them in a bubble. And Krishna was showing me from early on, like, you can't keep her in a bubble, even though, you know, every fiber in me wanted to. But it's so true. And then now that I'm developing more in my Krishna consciousness, when she's home with me, it's like, or even on our phone calls, like, I'm able to give that to her so much more, because I'm able to have the time to develop my Krishna consciousness more when she's not here, to where when she is here, I can give it to her and I can find creative ways to show it to her. But also I can let go of like needing to make her be that way. And I can just be like, okay, she still has her path. You know, I think it's good. She has like her life at her dad's, where it's a little bit more normal, like normal in the material way. Whereas like with me, like I'm like kind of like heavy and like not a ton of TV time, or I try to engage more in Krishna activities and stuff. I mean, I think I do well balancing it. But anyways, that's besides the point. But it's just like that idea of like, yeah, they're not ours, you know? They're not ours to keep, to hold on to extract pleasure. And then like bringing that into, you know, relationships, like personal, intimate relationships, that's one I contemplate a lot, that I've struggled to do, I think, or I don't know, but I would always like think about like, I know for me, I would want to like pour into the other person so much to where I'd want them to grow and like be their best selves, but maybe they weren't ready to be their best selves. And anyways, I'm not trying to analyze all that, but I feel like I've always wanted that in my life, is someone to like pour into me and help encourage me to be my best self. And instead of like being like a possession, like I've always noticed if a relationship felt too possessive, like they were like trying to make me be theirs, I like couldn't do it. Like I was like, okay, I gotta like just, you know what I mean? And I think because I want to have that consciousness of like, we pour into each other to support each other, to be our best selves, or to serve Krishna more, or whatever it, you know, whatever it is that makes us be our best self. And I've always wanted to experience that, but it's like, anyways, but that's like, it's so true. When you can both do that, then each person can like thrive as themselves, and you don't become like this imbalanced, like, oh, I'm serving you, now you're serving me, and it like creates that tension. And So I just wanted to share those things, like, give the love away, and or like to water the flower. And then I really liked what you said too about like hurt attracts hurt.
Mm.
And I was listening to Bhagavatam class that Mother Sukavaha from New Vrindavan was giving. It was actually on Friday, but I was listening to it last night. And she talks so much about how we all have these these ego triggers inside of us, these things that aren't quite mature yet or aren't quite healed yet. And the more we can bring light and compassion to ourselves and those like not so good qualities of ourselves, the more we can extend that compassion to others. And I think we were hitting on that, like 2 verses ago. It's just like bringing that light to ourselves and that compassion to those things that aren't so mature, so that we can show up more for others, and offer that selfless love to those who are there. But I want to like discuss more, if anyone else has any other thing. How do we like what am I trying to say? How do we give compassion to these egoistic mentalities without being overly what's the word? Oh, sorry, it's losing me. So to bring compassion, but to still keep like the rails up, to correct compassionately, like with a child. Obviously you don't want to give them a knife or put them near fire, so you give them boundaries. But how do we do that with each other, with our equals, with our peers? How do we say, hey, you're a little off, in a compassionate way? I think that's something that
Yeah.
I struggle with. I'm overly not of what is the word, overly, it's not tolerant, validating. Like I want to
Sure.
validate, but also I want to be able to be like, hey, like you're still a little off. Like I get you're there and I have compassion for it, but you're off. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a couple things come to mind when you say that. Thank you for that share, by the way. That's so profound. As always, I'm so happy when I see your hand up. Share it, Mariah. What's what Mariah has to say today. But I think so oftentimes, I remember I was in this relationship. It was this meeting. It was not like a romantic relationship. It was a meeting. I was working with these other people, and I was saying, oh no, I don't think that's a good idea. And one of the people said something like, oh yeah, she's not so nice. She'll tell you that she's not so nice. And I thought to myself, I could tell that they were like over, like, because I had told this person, I didn't think that was the way, that was what we were going to do. Or, I had told this person that they shouldn't engage in that way. And really it was for their best interest. But the person near me was like so sensitive to them, hearing that they kind of, where they were like, oh no. I'm like, okay, well, that person can do it, but it's not going to work out best for them. Like it was really just in in their best interest, but the person couldn't see that. And I think sometimes we say, oh, I'm just being nice. I'm just being nice. But really we're afraid of how the other person's going to respond to what we say in a way that's going to reflect on our ego and make us feel bad or look bad, and it's like kind of this misconstrued like niceness.
Yeah.
Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Can you relate to
Yeah.
that?
No, I've
And
heard people say that, like, be kind, not nice. Because being nice, it's like you're overly validating everyone. But being kind is like, hey, I'm still going to tell you how I think, but in a kind way, I guess.
Yeah, in a sensitive, loving way. But it's like, but sometimes we can confuse ourselves. We can trick ourselves into thinking that, oh, I'm just so caring. I just really care. But really, you really just care about yourself because you really just don't want that person, you're really still entangled with that other person, or with how that person is going to think of you, or what that's going to mean to this relationship. Or so it's like almost altogether we have to get disentangled so that we're not so focused on our ego, but again, service to God. So the way that we're interacting with this person is not to satisfy our ego, or so that I can show up so knowledgeable or so sweet or so nice, or I can be their best friend and then they'll like me and then they'll feed my ego. That's like entangling.
Yeah.
If we can become detached enough that we're really operating at this platform where we're servants of God and our relationship with that person is really just out of service to God, it's almost like the fog can lift and you can actually show up for that person in an actual loving and compassionate way without bringing your own stuff to it, your own stuff to the relationship, your own ego, that's going to be entangling with that person. And sometimes, so we really have to get honest about our motives and our intentions and where we are in that relationship with that person. Because if we can get to that place where we're detached to a degree where our love for that person is really just so that we can serve God, it will change the way that we interact completely naturally. We don't even almost have to worry about that, because that will come across in our energy, in our consciousness, in the way that we in the way that we can show up. So like, even in a person, if you've been in a relationship where you feel like you're giving, and the person is taking, if you really look at that carefully, what's actually happening, what's usually happening is you're feeling like, oh, I'm so selflessly giving. But if you're sticking around in that relationship and you're really actually probably trying to get something back, whether or not, like, maybe you're trying to change that person, maybe you're trying to fix that person, and you're trying to do that so that you can for your own ego, so that you can feel better about yourself. You can get a feeling of self-worth, because the reality is, if a person who's just naturally giving and they see that it's not fruitful there, just kind of move on and just kind of go. They're not going to get too entangled in that relationship. They won't force it, they won't push it. They'll just maybe lightly put something out there, and if it's not received, they'll say, oh, okay, that person doesn't want to receive that, no problem, I'll move along. But we get caught, we get entangled because of our own egos and our need to prove, our need to fix, our need to. And in that way, we get caught in these dynamics where we feel like we're giving endlessly and this person is taking. And it's like, about reevaluate. We still need to purify our intention there. We still have a little bit of work to do so that we're not getting entangled in these things.
Damodar Priya is saying something on the chat there.
Let's see what she's saying. With a peer, it usually starts with asking if they want feedback and if the trust is there. Yeah, that's beautiful. And listening. Yeah. Do they want feedback? And you'll see that if they don't want feedback and you're not stuck in your ego, you won't have any problem not giving that to them. No problem. If it's our ego that wants to force that feedback, that wants to say, I know, I can fix you. I can, that's our ego. We're trying to satisfy our own ego.
Yeah, I recognize that in myself for sure. Just being a fixer. And I remember when I realized that, I was like, oh my God, like, I'm a fixer. Like, I have to stop. That's why I left my job as in mental health, because I was just like, this is so ego-based. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways. And if you're someone who is in that kind of role of responsibility, like you have students, or you have children, or you can see it can be really sticky. You have to be careful, because you'll see if you spend a lot of time, if you invest a lot of time with a person and they don't go where you want them to go, you can feel it in yourself where you're like, oh wow, that's to the degree that my ego was involved in that. And that's to the degree of impurity that I have, that I wasn't actually doing it for God. And for us is like, if you're in a position like that, if you're a teacher and you feel that, it's like, okay, that's how far I need to go, to the degree that I'm, giving selflessly so that I can see this person grow. And if they don't grow, I'm upset about it. That's something I need to work on. That's not selfless. So we never stop being purified in this process.
Right.
But she says, Damodar Priya says, in practicing nonviolent communication or compassionate conversation, using I statements and listening deeply in the conversation, letting go of the need to change the other. Yeah, all of these things are like beautiful tools. And then at the end of the day, notice your attachments. Notice
the intention behind it. Yeah.
And how easy it is for you to let go of your own agenda, your own. Sorry, what were you saying?
I was going to say, I started to recognize that in myself. Like, what is my intention behind, these relationships? Like, am I getting into fixer mode, And yeah, learning to be aware of that intention behind it, that was like huge for me. And just like, wow, okay, I'm totally doing this for the wrong reason. Like I think I'm being helpful and trying to give advice or whatever. And yeah, and reading about, I love that book, Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. I've read it like 3 times now. It's so good. But yeah, really learning to practice those in the moment and daily, that's like that's a whole nother meditation. But yeah, we're all a work in progress.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Trevor, you want to share one last thing before we, I didn't even realize we're so over time.
Sure. The relationships can be a complicated subject, especially in this age. But a thing that helped me was hearing about how most people are incomplete. They're half circles that attract other half circles. So nobody's whole. We're all walking around injured, looking for another injured person. And we already have all these expectations that we can't even fulfill for that other person ourselves. And it ends up a very dependent situation where whenever you become whole, you attract someone else that's whole eventually. And then you create like an infinity symbol where it's just complete harmony. But sometimes before you're able to attract that whole person, you get hasty and anxious like I did. I was desperate, I was lonely, and I guess I wasn't completely whole because of that. So I attracted my former partner that was very dependent, half circle, broke me in half. So it ended up being like a very destructive relationship, toxic relationship. So after creating boundaries and forgiving and loving that soul from a distance, I became more whole and whatnot, more patient, more in my purpose and embracing the solitude, taking it as a gift to develop that relationship and grow strength with it and whatnot. So yeah, it's important to become whole and not be too anxious to be with someone, but to be with the right person, not just with someone, but with the someone who's worth it spending your energy on. There's a lot of hurt people, and not everyone has intentions on becoming whole. That's what makes you unable to fix the recipient, is the recipient itself. If the recipient has no desire whatsoever to become whole, then they're going to break you back in half again.
Yeah, and if we can imbibe that we're not the controller and we're not God, and we don't have that power to do that, to make that person whole, we can take our rightful position as the servant, then we'll be able to release that before we even get too entangled in trying. Right? And that's what we're really trying to do here. So I love that. Let's all try to make ourselves more whole so that we can attract things in our life.
Yeah.
That
and all those expectations
match
that we have, all those expectations we have, and all the desires are actually something we should be getting from God. So we're expecting all of this out of this one individual who's only a part and parcel of God, but really we're our real focus is what we really need is from God himself. That's a lot of what Prabhupada was saying. All this depression, all these people that are looking for it in these substances and these people and whatnot, they actually are really desperate for that reconnection with Krishna.
Yeah, that's it. That's where we get our wholeness. That's the only place we can get our wholeness in this whole everything, not in this material existence, but in our connection with God. And then we'll see everything improve. We'll see the things in our life will attract abundance because we are that abundance. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you. And Lisa says, thank you everyone for your love. It was deeply healing just to listen today. I'm releasing my godmother. Service to Krishna is all. You're in our prayers, Lisa. We love you. We all have God-sized holes in our hearts. Damodar Priya says, yep, that's where we are. So thank you all. Thank you all for coming and sharing. We are, I think, the most over we've ever been. So I apologize for that. But keep your eye on the thread and this week for updates as to the schedule in the coming weeks. And yeah, thank you all for coming. Love you all.
Thank you. Haribol.
Haribol.
Thank you.